I've gotten the question a couple of times of why I call the music scene sometimes a climate. For example, the music climate of today, the climate of this type of music. It should come as no surprise that it's because of the ever-changing nature, and much like the weatherman, those who attempt to predict it are lucky if they're even right. Even trying to figure out what a genre is in music is really difficult. Where does this band fit? Is this band more like rock or is it more like country? Like many forms of art, it's a form of expression. It's a focused form of expression through music that can only be digested orally, which can come in many different styles based on speed, tempo, and instruments being used. These styles, which are similar, are generally grouped together and called genres, being defined by the best, revolutionized by the geniuses, and mastered by the wise. Each have their own legends and trailblazers and a collective living history. But within these, we have subgenres and differences with finite concentrations of efforts. Within these subgenres, they break down even more, with evolutions of themes that are being looked at. So today, I'm going to do a relatively quick editorial on my favorite genre, progressive rock, and how it fits in today's music climate. So what is progressive rock? Some people call it progressive rock, some people call it prog, some people use a capital P, some people use a lowercase p. What does it all mean? Well, very quickly, a crash course in the progressive rock history. It came about in the very late 60s and early 70s when a focus of making music shifted to a more experimentational focus and pushing the boundaries of what it means to be music. Taking influences from jazz, classical music, and even sometimes blues, these songs and albums don't need to follow the same song structure that other songs did at the time. This allowed for complex time signatures, longer drawn out pieces, and unconventional instruments and sounds and experimentations that had never been seen before. These songs are usually progressed in some kind of a way. They change and move around, and they get grand in scale at times. This was really big, especially in the mid-70s, where it was really fine-tuned and really mastered. But after almost a decade of music following this technique, the population found it just a little too much, with the emergence of disco hitting the popular crowds and getting the dancers going, and punk hitting that hard edge, almost as a direct call-out and opposite of progressive rock. The genre started to fizzle out pretty quickly. Those big names and masters of the past, such as Genesis and Yes, were putting out radio-friendly tunes. A few bands were still trying to hold on and rekindle the flame, but they were really far and few between. Enter the 90s, and those who grew up listening to progressive rock started to play it. Those who were influenced by it started to write music in the same kind of vein. Sure, they weren't getting airplay, but they were getting buzz and fan service. And now, after almost 2 decades from the 90s, this slowly rekindled fire, we see a lot of new progressive rock and a new prog coming to the surface. But we have a dilemma on our hands, people, and the whole point of this video of why I'm making this. The prog and progressive rock communities seem to be split on what exactly progressive rock and prog rock is today. There are those who believe progressive rock is music that pushes the boundaries forward, not limiting themselves to conventions or preconceived notions of what music should be. Music just is. You are progressing the music landscape as a whole. But there are also those who believe that prog is music that is a longer than normal runtime, reaching into the 10, 15, and even 20-minute mark. They have complex time signatures and many different instrumentational interludes. The song itself progresses. Really, at the end of the day, they're both kind of right. Both distinctions of what progressive rock was is correct. But in today's climate, unlike the 70s, there's a bit of a distinction we need to make between the two. For example, in the 70s, those two concepts were one and the same. Those longer length tracks were never heard before. Those long lengths of instrumentals were pushing the music boundaries. Those big overarching themes or concepts was huge and progressive and moving the landscape forward as a whole. But now it's already been said and done. Those longer songs have already clocked in and have been heard. Those concept albums have already pushed the boundaries forward. Are we really progressing the music forward if we're using the same techniques that have been used before? To illustrate my point, let's take a look at two bands that have called themselves progressive, or at least have had that label associated with them. The Spock's Beard certainly wasn't the first band in the 90s to pick up the prog flag and wave it proudly, but they were one of the most successful and most vocal to wear their influences on their sleeves. They were writing songs that were complex, longer than the usual 4 to 6 minute time slot. Many people love this return to form of the 70s progressive rock bands. But could we really call them progressive? Again, I go back to my point of this. Are they really progressive if they are using the same techniques as the forefathers have used? Some have tried to label this subgenre in the progressive rock banner as retro prog. Those bands that know what they're doing really isn't all that progressive, but loved what the 70s had done so much that they want to emulate and recapture that spirit and techniques. They actively use those techniques that have already been used before. But in this sense, they're pretty much the opposite of progressive rock if they're going backwards to what was done in the 70s. Now, they defend, and rightly so, with this. The song itself is what is progressing. It's the changing of shape and growing and is ending in a different spot from when it had started. And much like any music technique, this one is perfectly legitimate. There are some amazing masterpieces that have been crafted, and yes, even Spock's Beard have their name attached to them. So let us turn to another band, Radiohead. Even when Radiohead first came out, they were a part of that Brit alternative rock that we'd seen a lot before. But when they put out OK Computer, using different techniques that had never been seen before, and even when they dropped Kid A, which had sounds that again were never heard of, and themes and concepts that had never even been touched upon before, and music techniques that were so progressive that even by today's standards still feels new. This was really progressive rock in that it pushed the boundaries and really questioned what music meant and what we could do with it. But was OK Computer and Kid A prog? None of these songs were really that long in length. Each song kind of stayed in place within itself. Outside of maybe Paranoid Android, no song was over 6 minutes, and there was really no build-ups and no wandering around. But there was a unanimous agreement. This band was definitely progressive. So here's the dilemma. Both concepts of what it means to be progressive rock and what it means to be prog could not include the other. You were either like the sounds of the 70s with their complex time signatures, longer pieces, and creating those huge concepts, or you were pushing the boundaries of what it means to create music, trying new techniques, and not limiting yourself of what came before. In the end, both are valid forms of musical expressions and passions. Both are different forms of the same root that broke off to become two different branches. So first off, we have prog, those that are using the techniques from the 70s and are progressing within the song itself. And the other is progressive rock, those that are pushing the actual music forward and are progressing the song within the current culture and climate of the music scene. And I'm excited to see what happens next. Both of these forms of prog and progressive rocks are real forms of music. You don't have to enjoy both, but both forms exist to be enjoyed. And I, for one, devour and savor both, and am excited that both exist. And that's about it for me. Let me know what you guys think about this. This is an ever-changing concept, so please add your comments below. This is not the beginning point, nor is it even the end point, but where I see things right now. Where do you see progressive rock or prog rock right now? Where do you see it in the future? Do you think that those prog bands have a right to be called progressive? I know there's a lot of rage out there from fans of progressive rock over bands that call themselves progressive when they're really just rehashing those old techniques. But thanks for tuning in for this editorial. I was trying something a little bit different. And that's about it. That's all I've got to say. Notes out!